Hello and welcome to EOS Weekly, your weekly recap of EOS news and events. If you're looking for the Cliffs Notes version of EOS news, you've come to the right place. Please subscribe to our channel and we'll turn you into a highly informed member of the EOS community, all in 10-minute or less weekly episodes. Today is Wednesday, July 11th, and the title of this week's episode is The RAM Crisis Rages On. So let's get into this week's update. In blockchain and governance news, RAM price continues to be the hot topic on EOS forums and on Twitter, and so it is the primary focus of this week's episode. dApp developers have begun speaking out on the RAM price, some saying that if prices remain in the current range, it would be prohibitive to launching their apps on the EOS platform. Now, prices have come down slightly since their peak on July 3rd, when the price was slightly above 0.9 EOS per kilobyte of RAM. Lately, RAM has been trading in the range of 0.3 to 0.4 EOS per kilobyte, down to about a third of that peak price. Still, at this price, it costs $20 to $30 to do something like open a new account on EOS. One dApp, EOS Bet Casino, wrote a blog post on Medium explaining how this is impacting their launch. To quote EOS Bet Casino, "After talks with many fellow EOS dApp developers, it's clear that it will be impossible to launch our respective platforms given RAM prices." They go on to explain how dire the situation is and how we need to fix it quickly. The link to the EOS Bet Casino article is in the show notes below. Now, to zoom out for a moment, Dan Larimer and Block One foresaw that RAM price speculation might be an issue prior to the EOS launch in June. Back on May 4th, Dan Larimer wrote an article called Introducing EOSIO Dawn 4.0. In this article, Dan unveiled the free market RAM model for the first time and explained his reasoning for going this route. He went on to explain how RAM speculation may become an issue and that the long-term solution to this would be inter-blockchain communication, or IBC. IBC is the long-term fix for the RAM pricing issue. You can think of IBC as being somewhat synonymous with sidechains. The nuance here is that IBC is the technology that makes it possible to add a second and a third blockchain to the current mainnet blockchain. IBC is like the bridge that connects the sidechains to the mainnet. The reason why inter-blockchain communication and sidechains will ultimately fix the RAM pricing issue is because adding sidechains increases the RAM supply. Each sidechain will have its own RAM supply, doubling supply when the first sidechain is added to the mainnet, or tripling the current supply if two sidechains were added to the mainnet, and so on for the fourth and fifth sidechains. The number of sidechains that can be added is virtually unlimited, which will drive down RAM prices and make speculation much less attractive. The link to the Dawn 4.0 article is in the show notes below, as is a link to a video on July 2nd when Dan again describes sidechains as the long-term solution to the RAM pricing issue. So, while it's great news that we know what the long-term solution is, it still leaves us in a bit of a crisis at present. IBC is not going to be ready until late 2018. In the meantime, we have EOS dApp developers evaluating other blockchains and potentially jumping ship. It's important that we, as the EOS community, listen to these dApp developers and take their concerns seriously. We had a lot of momentum going into the EOS launch in June, and this RAM issue is causing us to lose some of that momentum. For example, Airdrops have slowed down with only one going out in the last week. It reportedly took $200,000 to procure the RAM for that one airdrop, even with prices down from their peak. We'll discuss this further in our next section on dApps and airdrops. What we need is a short-term solution to keep RAM prices reasonable while we wait for inter-blockchain communication and sidechains. dApp creators and block producers have been debating the best approach in effort to come up with an interim solution. There have been a multitude of proposals made, but they all seem to fit into one of these three categories. They are 1. The rent model, 2. Enabling short selling and futures trading, 3. Stake-based RAM allocation. One thing everybody seems to agree on is that we need to gradually increase the RAM supply over time at a rate known to all. This will prevent block producers from having an edge over everyone else in trading the RAM market. So regardless of which of the three options are implemented, the gradual increase in RAM supply seems to be a given. But to summarize the three categories of solutions, the first one, the rent model, means that EOS RAM holders would need to pay a small percentage fee based on the amount of RAM they are holding and the duration they are holding it. Essentially, it would be like paying monthly rent for holding RAM, which would dissuade speculators from the game. Enabling short selling or futures trading is the second category of proposed solutions. The idea here is to enhance the current free market dynamics so that it's not so one-sided. Short selling would enable people to speculate the other way, theoretically driving prices downward. Liquid EOS, a block producer related to Bancor, which created the Bancor relay algorithm used in the EOS RAM market, wrote up an article describing why these first two proposals, the rent model and enabling futures in the RAM market, would both be viable options for keeping the RAM prices low. The link to this Liquid EOS article is in the show notes below. The third and final option is a return to stake-based RAM allocation. This was the original plan as of the Dawn 3.0 release. The idea here was that each EOS token holder would have a certain amount of RAM allocated to them based on the amount of EOS held, just like how it works for CPU usage. To do the math, with 64 gigabytes of RAM available on the EOS blockchain, if you divide that by 1 billion existing EOS tokens, you'd have 64 bytes of RAM for every 1 EOS token. This is the equivalent of 1 kilobyte of RAM for every 15 EOS tokens, which would be 42 times as expensive as the current RAM price on the free market. Obviously, this alone would not be a good solution. However, one of the suggestions that has recently surfaced is that we incentivize token holders to release unused RAM. For example, if we were to take 1% of the annual EOS inflation and use it to reward those token holders who free up their unused RAM for others to use, RAM would only be held by those who truly need it, the dApp developers. If we went this route, we could do away with the RAM market entirely. There would be no speculation. Those who are holding EOS for investment purposes only would have a good reason to check a box that releases their unused RAM to the rest of the community, because in doing so, they would see their EOS holdings grow over time. And dApp developers would be encouraged to invest in enough EOS tokens to run their app. EOS Dublin, a block producer candidate, wrote an article on this stake-based model as a proposed fix to the RAM solution, to the RAM issue, that is. In it, they said, "We now have the absurd situation where holding EOS essentially only gives you the right, but not the obligation, to buy some RAM in a crazy volatile market. Returning to a stake-based system will increase the demand for EOS native tokens, which will increase the value of everyone's holdings." It is unclear which direction the EOS community will take, but it will likely be some combination of these three proposed solutions. We'll be tracking this closely and report further in next week's episode. On to the dApps and Airdrops news. Everipedia was the first company to announce that they would be doing an airdrop on EOS token holders, and they continue to be one of the most promising early adopters of EOS. If you are not familiar with Everipedia, they are like a Wikipedia running on top of blockchain, where contributors and moderators can earn tokens for building and maintaining the content. They have already raised $31 million in Series A funding. Many EOS token holders have been eagerly awaiting the Everipedia airdrop, but the airdrop has been delayed while their legal team makes sure everything is kosher with the airdrop. There was a rumor going around that the delay in the airdrop was exacerbated by the volatile RAM prices, suggesting that Everipedia sold their RAM once the price hit a certain point, and that they have been nervous about re-entering the market due to the volatility. This rumor was dispelled in a reply on Reddit, where Everipedia explained that it was purely legal cautiousness and had nothing to do with the RAM prices. They said that while they did sell a small portion of RAM, they still have plenty staked for the airdrop. The airdrops have, however, slowed down this week, with only one airdrop going out. Challenge token, CHL, went out as a 2-to-1 ratio, meaning EOS token holders received 2 challenge tokens for every 1 EOS held. Challenge is a dApp started by Kent at EOS San Diego. EOS San Diego is a YouTube channel, and there are 2 links in the show notes below to videos showing the initial announcement of the challenge dApp and the announcement when the airdrop began. The airdrop took a few days but should be completed by now. The challenge dApp is for encouraging people to work out. Participants can earn challenge tokens by achieving certain workout goals set by yourself or others. As mentioned earlier, it took a $200,000 investment in EOS tokens in order to procure enough RAM for this airdrop. This is double what we estimated in last week's episode when we said it would be around $100,000 to do the airdrop, but the challenge token was the first airdrop to go out since the RAM price surge. So it stands to reason that any airdrops in the near future would require a similar sized investment of $200,000. which will inevitably slow down the rollout of further airdrops, except for those dApps that are well funded, of course. Having some barrier to entry is probably a good thing so that airdrops don't become a form of spam. But if entrepreneurs were planning to use airdrops as a form of initial fundraising, the threshold of $200,000 will weed out the majority of them. It will be interesting to see how many airdrops go out in the coming weeks while we identify and implement a solution to the RAM pricing issue. We will, of course, be monitoring this closely and keep you informed in upcoming episodes. And that brings us to our featured EOS project of the week. With EOS still in its infancy stage, there's a lot of uncertainty and confusion at the moment. While we are confident the EOS community will work through these issues in time, it is a huge help when a strong, clear-headed voice stands up and provides a clear vision as to where this blockchain should be headed. And while we all love Dan Larimer, none of us want EOS to be a dictatorship. So, when someone in the community makes a strong, contrarian argument as to why the status quo is not acceptable, we want to acknowledge them here. That's why we have chosen the block producer, EOS Dublin, as this week's EOS project of the week. EOS Dublin is currently number 53 in the block producer ranking. They are part of the bare metal brigade and were listed among the top block producers that Dutch EOS has recommended voting for. In fact, several of the top trustworthy voting proxies have identified EOS Dublin as a block producer deserving of more votes. But what caught our eye most recently was the thought leadership EOS Dublin has been providing. They have stood strongly behind the ECAF during these early days when the ECAF has been the subject of much ridicule, and EOS Dublin is now the leading voice in an alternative solution to the RAM pricing issue, the return to stake-based RAM, which we discussed earlier. We believe EOS Dublin is on the right track in the RAM debate, offering a solution that is simpler, fairer, and has the best interests in mind for both the dApp developers as well as the EOS token holders. They have been articulating the stake-based solution clearly in their blog posts and on social media, and have become the leading voice for this solution among the EOS community. You can learn more about EOS Dublin at EOSDublin.com. To vote for EOS Dublin, their block producer account name is EOSDUBLINWOW. The link to their website and recent blog posts are in the show notes below. Congratulations to EOS Dublin on being selected this week's project of the week. If you would like to nominate a great EOS project to be recognized here, please ping us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EOSWeekly. That's it for this week's episode of EOS Weekly. Please like and subscribe if you found this content informative and you want to continue to stay current on EOS as this revolution unfolds. Thanks, and we'll see you next week right here on EOS Weekly.